A woman stands, apprehensive, in her apartment, tentatively approaching the large cage in front of her. Inside is a somber, shadowy figure who's been stalking her memories ever since the passing of her beloved partner. Ida has been mourning the death of Owl, both of them young musicians, and when we first meet her, she's overwhelmed by the various emotions that have accompanied her loss and is presented with a disjointed picture of their time together, never able to look back without some indication of the pain that she's experiencing. Grief is obviously a huge topic to attempt to tackle, and I've previously talked about a game that looks at grief on a wider scale, but how does one individual overcome the loss of another? How do they come to terms with the pain that now exists in their previously happy memories of them? When the Past Was Around, the 2020 game by Mojiken attempts to answer or maybe just explore these very questions. The game begins as a jumbled sequence of events, becoming more organised with each new chapter. The prologue depicts an unspecified period in the relationship of Owl and Ida before jumping forward to Owl's funeral and Ida being in the house alone. The game then jumps back to when Ida first meets Owl and then begins to fill in the gaps as you progress from there. When faced with the death of a loved one, it can take time for things to sink in and leave you scattered as you try and make sense of what has just happened. The quick cuts in chronology could be seen as a depiction of this experience. Earlier in the game, the continuity is chaotic. As you progress further through the story and you go further on your journey to acceptance, the memories become more streamlined, more coherent, and a more stable picture of the situation begins to be cultivated, mirroring the emotional transition in Ida from overwhelming shock and grief to a more rational and manageable acceptance. That's not to say that she isn't still sad or that she no longer misses Owl, because of course she does, but as his figure fades away on the beach during the end credits, it symbolises the next stage of this healing process. She misses Owl, sure, but she's now able to at least enjoy the memory of the time they had spent together and once again find enjoyment in the things that they shared, seen in her playing of the violin as Owl finally disappears. Throughout the story, during the prologue and in between the flashbacks, Ida is stalked by the imposing shadowy figure who later resides in the cage within her apartment. The prologue reveals this figure as Owl, and seeing as the initial scenes depicted are cosy and loving, it seems to show how the spectre of Owl's death is beginning to infect these once happy memories. Overcoming this ghost in the pursuit of reclaiming these memories is a central theme of the game. The figure then reappearing in a cage, and this taking place after the funeral, represents a deeper problem to be dealt with, perhaps expected after the renewal of emotion that a funeral would surely bring. Not only are the happy memories of Owl trapped in this cage of sadness, tainted by Ida's grief to the point that something that should be comforting is still painful, but the silhouetted figure manages to obscure even the reassurance provided by an image of the man himself, or bird himself. Instead of Owl's comforting face, the agony of his loss presents us only a reminder of his absence. Owl is not here, but something is, even if it's just a representation of the space that he's left behind. The figure is like a black hole, sucking in every positive emotion and happy memory as it feeds Ida's grief until she finally manages to overcome it, at which point the cage is broken and the soothing face of Owl once again appears to ease her mind. Now, the most obvious feature of Owl is his less than orthodox appearance, shall we say. It's clearly not just a clever name. Having our partner take the form of an anthropomorphic bird, or at least half of one, allows for several interpretations. For one thing, it makes him stand out. It makes sense that Ida, in her all-consuming grief, focuses solely on him as she revisits her memories. In particular, the scene of him playing violin in the park makes for a good visual representation of her focus. Even with the consistent art style and uniformly pastel colours, he commands your attention, as he does hers. Why then an owl? Well, they bring connotations of wisdom and this sense of omnipotence, all-seeing, all-knowing. Perhaps she's projecting these ideals onto her lover now that he's gone. Not only does the death of a loved one make you appreciate them all the more fervently, but Ida's clearly hurting in her grief. Perhaps she feels that Owl is the only one who could make it better, hence the all-knowing persona he's being cast as. The image of an owl also brings a sense of calm, a self-assuredness that would be so appealing to Ida in her manic state of confusion and pain. Whilst the use of any bird has the obvious connection to flight, ascension, and a feeling of freedom from the grounded reality below, that Owl is now untethered to the earth and to Ida's life, as is a bird in flight. Or maybe it's just a man with an owl head. It doesn't really matter, because even if in this world there are other hybrid creatures walking around, Owl is the only one that we see, and that's important. Because even at the surface level, his appearance cultivates a surreal atmosphere. This juxtaposition of the mundane with the absurd gives the game the feeling of a dream, a suspension of logic and cohesion that focuses instead on generating intense feelings and images without the need to rely on the facts of reality. It's like she's wandering through her memories, like we would wander through a dream, never centered on one place or time, instead just trying to get through this experience in any way possible, taking any route available. She's on her own, and without anyone who could fully understand her relationship to the person that she had just lost. Isn't that what grief is at the end of the day? I feel stupid for even mentioning it because, well, you're looking at it now, but this art style is just beautiful, so peaceful and relaxing. It feels like I'm playing a Professor Layton game, although with less stylized character design. The focus is obviously on the narrative, and so this simple look does well to be subtle, cultivating an atmosphere without ever overpowering or distracting from it, and only standing out when necessary, like in Owl's design as mentioned. It's the obvious compliment, but this style brings so much charm to the game, with an aesthetic that fits perfectly with the small-scale story and relatively simple puzzle solving. It's impressive that so much emotion could be conveyed by these visuals when there is no dialogue at all throughout the game. The art style allows for objects and people to be drawn to heighten their main features or meanings. Objects such as this candle, for example, can be stylized alongside the darkness of the room to show Ida's loneliness or the importance of Owl's memory in a way perhaps not as easily replicated with more realistic visuals and with no need for any words at all. But for all the appeal of the visuals, as lovely as they are, it's the soundtrack that deserves the highest praise. It consists mainly of one song, or at least several songs all tied together with the same leitmotif and similar chord progressions, changing only in the instruments being used at any one moment. But the final chapter, for example, adds piano that gives a wistful and happy song some somber tones to fit the mood of the scene. But the real draw of the music is that the characters are shown to write the piece as the plot develops, completing various sections as the chapters progress. It is literally the soundtrack to their lives, and a great touch. The repeated music also calls back to the game's theme. The seemingly endless cycle of grief and the journey through repeated memories is given a literal representation in the repetition of these musical phrases. Several moments in the game have Ida following the sound of Owl's playing, perhaps showing how the memory of his music is one of the devices used to conjure up memories of him now that he's gone, or that it's the feature most associated with him. Either way, his death has both tainted this hobby of hers, as she breaks her violin early in the game, and has left her unable to avoid the emotional pull of his music. At the end, however, to symbolise her acceptance and overcoming of grief, she plays the violin for Owl, who in turn replicates her enthrallment before the two of them play together, and he fades away. Being a point-and-click game, most of the gameplay revolves around the myriad of puzzles and problems that you must solve in order to progress through the various chapters. Keeping in line with the theme of the game, a lot of these puzzles revolve around putting things in order, placing memories in the correct chronology, sequencing numbers, that sort of thing, which mirrors the scattered presentation of the game's own chronology, at least in the beginning of it. There are other types of puzzles too, which keeps things varied, but not all of them are related to the actual plot, which I did notice as a criticism from a few reviewers who felt that they perhaps took the player out of the story. I will agree that some puzzles are more ingrained than others. Most of them do exist solely to open up the path to the end of the chapter, finding clues to open things, to find keys, to open doors, that sort of thing. But later in the game there are tasks like tea making, where you find ingredients and then make tea to the specifications given to facilitate the interaction taking place between the two main characters. But the puzzles still serve the game by moving the plot forward. If you didn't have the obstructions to build the puzzles around, then you wouldn't have a game. The only criticism that I would pose in a similar vein is that whenever a puzzle was difficult, the time it took to really think about it, when I just sat and went over the clues or tried out various answers, these things did take me out of the game, if only momentarily. That's not really a major problem though, as for one thing, having the puzzles be too easy would be an even greater issue, and of course the difficulty of the puzzles is going to be different for every player. I'm sure some people found every puzzle to be incredibly easy to solve, and perhaps others found more cryptic puzzles than I did. I only mention it as a brief thought, because overall the puzzles were really enjoyable, even if there were a few that I didn't really understand. Like this box, I just opened it by accident. I'm still not entirely sure what I did to make it work, but these were few and far between. But the one that stood out to me the most was this ice cream puzzle. After eating the ice cream on the beach, the sticks spell out "My Dearest" with certain letters having extra symbols above or below them. It presented an obvious parallel to the padlock in the previous room, but nothing I tried seemed to work. I entered all the letters with symbols, then the letters in alphabetical order, even just spelling the words out, but it wouldn't budge. When I saw Ida's name spelled with the ketchup on the sandwich later on, I didn't even clock at first that the symbols were the same, but when I finally figured it out, it felt great. I really haven't played many puzzle games like this, but the feeling of solving a puzzle, feeling like you figured something out on your own, is electrifying, and I can't imagine a better genre to bring this world and this story to life. As a small-scale experience, When the Past Was Around is a lovely game to play, with a beautifully appealing world to immerse yourself in, if only for 90 minutes or so. I stumbled across it as a free game with gold, having never heard of it before, and was amazed by how quickly I became invested in this story, even more so when you appreciate the simplicity of its communication, no dialogue, no text. Having played it so recently, time will only tell if it stays as memorable as many other games have been, but if nothing else, When the Past Was Around tells a wistfully bittersweet story about one individual and their love for another. If you enjoyed this video, then feel free to like it, comment, all that good stuff. It feels a bit cringy to say it, but you know, it is what it is. I do genuinely appreciate it though, of course. And if you enjoyed this type of content, then maybe subscribe for more. I know at least one other video that is very similar to this one. If nothing else though, I just hope that you enjoyed it. And I would recommend this game to anyone still here. I think it's about £7 on most platforms, but yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.